Hi there, my name is Mal and I'm a support engineer at Vizion. I'm going to be walking you through how to integrate Vizion with Power Automate. First, we'll set up a subscription flow that will allow us to enter shipment information in Excel, and then that information will be sent to Vizion to subscribe to those containers. And then we'll create a second flow that will run when new updates are available. So it will do two things. It will add a log of updates to a new Excel sheet, and it will also send email notifications when a container is nearing the destination port. So our first step will be to create our input Excel sheet. You'll see I have this containers sheet, and this is where we will enter in our container ID and carrier code, or bill of lading and carrier code to be sent to Vizion. So to do that, to make that compatible with Power Automate, we want to create a table in this sheet. So this table will have 5 columns. So we can go to Insert, Table. Let's select My Table Has Headers and click OK. Great, so now we have our 5 columns. So you will see I went ahead and added the column names. You can go ahead and pause the video and make your columns match the ones that I have here. Like I said before, this will be the container ID and carrier code we enter, or the bill of lading and carrier code. We have a subscribed column, which will tell us whether or not a reference has been created for that container yet. And then a reference ID, which will be the unique ID coming from Vizion that we'll include here. So now that we have our input Excel sheet created, we can start our first flow in Power Automate. So we want to go to New Flow and select Scheduled Cloud Flow. For flow name, I'm going to call this Check for New Shipments. Can keep the starting date, and then we want to make sure it's set to repeat every 1 minute. So every 1 minute we want to check the Excel sheet for new data, and then just click Create. Okay, so now we'll select New Step, and we want to choose List Rows Present in a Table, and this is the Excel connector. And we'll choose the location. This may be different depending on your environment. You'll choose the location of the file. So this is the Excel file that we created for the input, and then choose the table and click Save. So for our next step, we want to take the rows that we get from our Excel sheet and use the apply each operation to iterate over each row. And so the output we want is the value, so just the list of items that we're pulling from our Excel sheet. So next we'll choose add an action, and we want a condition. So as I mentioned before, there's the subscribe column, and this column will tell us whether or not we've subscribed to a particular container. So we'll say if subscribe does not contain a yes value, we'll want to send a request to subscribe to it, and if not, there's nothing we need to do. So within yes, we're actually going to add another condition. This will control, so we want to check to see if the container ID is equal to, and then we'll just leave this blank. So if the container ID is blank, that means that we need to subscribe using bill of lading. So if container ID is blank, subscribe via bill of lading. If not, subscribe using the container ID and carrier code. So let's do the container ID and carrier code portion first. So if no, add an action. We want to use HTTP. The method will be post. Our URL is prod.vizionapi.com/references. There are a few headers that we need to enter in. X API key. In the value field, you'll enter in your Vizion API key. And then we have the content type, which will be application JSON. So the body of the request is going to be the typical body of a Vizion API request. So you can copy from our API docs, the body, and we want to replace container ID and carrier code with their dynamic values coming from our workbook. And I noticed I have an extra character here, so just make sure that you remove that if you're copying and pasting from the API docs. I went ahead and renamed this particular action just so we can easily differentiate over what's going on here. So this is the container ID and carrier code post request. And now we want to copy this work for bill of lading. So again, we'll choose HTTP. We want a post request. We'll use the same URL, the same headers. And as I mentioned before, you'll make sure to enter your API key there. And then in the body, it's going to look the same, except this time we're using bill of lading. So this will look like bill lading. And then we'll search for that dynamic value. Make sure to add a comma. Okay, great. Looks good. So our next action, and this will happen on both sides, will be to parse our JSON. So we want to take the body of the response that's sent back. And this is the schema that I generated from a sample Vizion response. It will be linked in the description, so you can just you can just copy the schema from there. But I want to parse my JSON because I need to use the reference ID value to attach to the reference that is being created. So we'll duplicate this work on this side as well. Our last step, which we'll do for both sides, is to update a row. So in our sheet where we're subscribing to containers, we want to make sure that we mark a container as subscribed yes. And also we want to take the reference ID and include that as well. So select the location. Again, we're choosing the same input Excel sheet. The table will be the same table that we chose at the beginning. Our key column for this side, we'll use the bill of lading. For the value, we'll use the dynamic bill of lading from the spreadsheet. The subscribe column, we want to add yes, and we want to add the ID to the reference ID column. And so we can just duplicate this work for container ID as well. So we're just copying over the same values, choose the same file location, table, and on this side I'm using container ID as the key column, the dynamic value, in the spreadsheet. Oops. And then again, we'll do the same thing. Yes, if it's been subscribed to, and add the ID. Okay, great. So that is all we need for our subscription workflow. We can now focus on creating the flow that will accept updates as they come in from Vizion. So we're going to go back to My Flows, select New Flow, and choose Instant Cloud Flow. And here it will ask you for a trigger, and we want to choose when an HTTP request is received. So when Vizion sends a request to our workflow, we want to perform these next actions. So if I click on this, I can see that once I create the next step, it will generate the URL for me, but this will be the callback URL that we're going to use for Vizion to send the update payloads. So this next step will be to parse the JSON. So when we receive the request, we want to take the body of it, and this is a schema, again, that I generated from a sample Vizion response. It will be included in the description, but for now you can go ahead and click Save. And now that we have that step in place, we can go back and see that our callback URL has been created. So the next step is to create an Excel sheet that will store the updates that Vizion provides. So you can format this however you'd like in terms of what fields you want to pull from the data. For the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to use 4 different columns. So again, I want to go to Insert, Table. My table has headers. So now I have these 4 columns. And again, I went ahead and changed these names to map to the field. So this is ID, so the reference ID, the status of the reference, the container ID, and then the full payload. So this is how I kind of want to log those updates. So my next step will be to add a row into a table, the table that we just created in the last step. So this will be our updates Excel sheet. The table will be the default table name. And now this will populate with my properties that I can just match with the dynamic value. And this payload will be the body. Okay, so this part completes the logging that we're doing of Vizion updates. Of course, there are many different things you can do with those updates, but we're going to now focus on making the data useful for a particular workflow. So I want to be sent an email each time one of my containers is estimated to arrive at its destination in 5 days or less. And to do this, I want to first initialize a variable. So I'm going to call this days before, be a string, and I'm going to use a function here. So we can go to expression, and this function is basically getting the current time and finding 5 days before. So 5 days before, I want to check. Start checking and getting alerts for when my container is estimated to arrive. Next, I need to actually loop through the milestones that Vizion is sending back. So we'll use the apply each option to iterate over them, and the output will be the milestones object. Search here, there it is. This is where for each milestone I'm defining the conditions that must be present for me to be sent an email alert. So I want the description, which is Vizion's event names, to be equal to vessel arrived at destination. I want the planned flag equal true. So that is a planned event. It hasn't happened yet. And lastly, I want my timestamp to be to be greater than my days before variable, but I want it to be less than, less than today. So I'm going to use expression, and we can just do UTC now. So if these conditions are met, I want to be sent an email alert. So I'm not going to walk through the exact setup here because there are a bunch of different ways you can do this depending on, which email provider you're using or where you would like it to be sent. But just in general, there are many different options. I have an example here. So you can send an email, you can, include these dynamic values in the subject line. So this would show the container ID is arriving soon and provide me with whatever information I want from the payload in the body of the email. One last final and important step here. So let's go back to the top of this flow. We want to copy this URL. This is the callback URL that we'll need to use in our check for new shipments flow. So you might remember I noted that we were using kind of a placeholder URL for the time being. But now we can go back in here and under callback URL, you'll want it to be set to our flow that handles incoming updates. Okay, so I entered in a few more container IDs, one bill of lading example, and next time my flow runs, it should pick up these containers and we should start seeing that they are subscribed. So we can just see the first one came in and they're kind of slowly, yes, so all of our containers are now subscribed. We have a unique ID from Vizion. And if we go to our updates tab, we can see that we're going to begin receiving our updates and the payload here. So everything looks to be working as expected. So this video is intended to help you get started using Vizion within Power Automate. We walked through how to create a subscription workflow using Excel, how to receive updates, and how to check specific conditions for milestone alerts. I hope this video was useful for you. If you have any questions or feedback, please feel free to reach out to us at support@vizionapi.com. Thanks.